You ever think about the fact that you got about 49 storylines running through your mind at any given time? Seriously, give that some thought. It's a little bit of a different concept at first, but when you think about it, it's right there in front of you. And it's probably more than that if you really think about it, because the stories that we tell about our lives and about our experiences tend to be highly emotional. They come from a place of how we felt, not always when we were in the experience, but how we feel at the moment. And if you think about that, you recognize that there's a whole lot of different emotions, a large number of emotions that we experience. And if you just take a subset of that and apply the fact that the mood that we're in, the emotional state that we're in, has a whole lot to do with the way we communicate, with the type of stories that we tell, that's critical. So if you're feeling great, you're going to tell a better story about a situation than if you're feeling not so great. And I remember having a scenario once where I was in a not so great spot and someone pointed out, said, hey, you'd probably be better served if you told a better story about what you're going through. And I thought, how does that make sense? And it's almost like you think of a sports analogy and you ask someone, how'd the game go? They could have played their best game of their life. But if their team lost, they might say, oh, we lost. And they're feeling down and they're telling the story from the perspective of their emotion. But if they just played the exact same performance and their team won by a point instead of lost by a point, and that 1 point victory happened to be they won the championship, and that 1 point victory also happened to mean that the storyteller's now the MVP. How are they going to answer that question of how'd the game go? They're not going to say, well, we won or we didn't lose. They're going to say, oh, it went great. Oh my gosh, I was so excited. Everything was amazing. Great team, great performance. Everybody did awesome. I even won MVP. I'm so excited. I'm elated. I'm over the moon. And if it tied, what would the story be like? Assume no overtime, no sudden death. It's going to be a different version of that story. So that's 3 simple examples, 3 different emotions, 3 different setups where we could just say, hey, how did it go? Or how do you evaluate the exact same performance? And the story told, the storyline is way different in each scenario. So taking a minute to think about that and say, okay, well, in what scenarios am I telling certain stories about my life that follow a storyline based on an emotional pattern or emotional consistency? Or let's just say you have an emotion that's dominant in a particular season of your life. Then in that case, it may be that you're telling the stories from an emotional place where that frequency resonating is one that might be anchoring down stories in a way that you've told them so many times. With that emotional feel, they start to get anchored down and almost stained on the brain with the memory and the emotional state that you maintain during that time. So keeping in mind, when you're telling a story, when you're trying to remember something, what emotional state are you in? How are you recalling that? How are you reflecting on that? Because if we're always in a bad mood when we refer to a certain instance or certain experience in our life, then it's going to stain our brain as a bad thing. But some of you have heard the idea that it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. Well, if you can take that concept and start to look at what are you learning from an experience? What do you have to be grateful for in a dark hour? Because guess what? There's never been a double night, 2 nights in a row. Eventually the sun rises as long as I've been around, and probably the same goes for you too. And so after the night comes the day. And knowing that there's seasons that can be pushed through, you want to keep in mind that there's an ability to tell some of those stories in a different way. So once you're past the dark moment, how do you then look back at it? Once you have the experience, once you've learned the lesson, do you tell the story of the difficult trial or tribulation in a different light? Well, I'd hope so, especially now that you're empowered, you're enlightened, you've gained the experience, you have the know-how, you've got what you need so that horrendous thing doesn't happen to you again, so that you're able to take on the world with greater confidence, knowing what you know now and how you're ready to be positioned for future obstacles in your own quest for greatness. So looking at the fact that you've got all these different storylines running through your mind and how they all depend on the time in which you told the story, the state in which you told the story, the mood you were in when you told the story. The mood you're in when you tell the story can be greater than the mood you were in when you went through the experience. And all of a sudden, you're looking back. You ever had those scenarios you look back and now you laugh on it? Remember that time? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I slipped and fell in the mud and they all laughed at me. It was crazy. I can't believe that took place. And I'm just picking something random. I guess I can't say that happened to me. But that idea, we've all had an embarrassing moment that we can look back and laugh with as you look at the memory and say, that was pretty funny. Versus, oh my gosh, I'm still scarred from the moment. Well, in some cases, not to offend, but that's the instance. Too much of that story has been told and baked in with that negative emotion, and not having moved past that, being able to look at it from a different perspective, from a perspective of that's a past thing, not a pain still being experienced. So the storyline, in most cases, if we look back and say, oh, that was something from when I was a kid, we can shift that storyline now. But even as we get to become adults, there's not really the kid phase anymore. So do we still have the flexibility, the mental dexterity to be able to move past some of these situations where you go through a sticky spot or you run in through some tough times? Can you be able to look back and laugh? Can you be able to look back on the situation or find grace in the moment and give yourself grace and look at yourself through kind eyes, knowing that there's a different storyline waiting to be told if you'll allow it, if you'll allow a different emotional state to come into your into your essence, into your being. When you let the storm pass and the sunny days come back and you got, better emotional ground to stand on, you're more stable to tell a better story, to speak a better storyline. So pick a different one of the 49 storylines. Have that option, reserve that option to switch the storyline that you're using. If you find yourself telling the same story and you're finding that story is not making you feel good, that's a signal that there may be a different way to tell it. There may be a different way to look at the timing of when you tell it, and maybe waiting to tell it until you're ready to tell it. And that goes for everything that we're going through, whether it's a story spoken to the outside world or the story going on inside your own mind. It's 49 storylines for you folks. Hopefully you took something from this. And if nothing else, a gift to help self-awareness as you go through your own journey of life. Which story are you telling? Is it one that makes you feel good? And if not, is there a way that you can tell that story in a better way? I bet there is. And to you, I wish you best of luck in doing that. I can't wait to hear some of your success stories. Until next time, this is your host, Drew Davis. Learn how to see better. It's the only podcast out there that'll improve your vision the longer you listen.